Okay, hello everybody. It's Lindsay from Freedom Media WA, and bringing you the second broadcast, I guess, but the first large-scale broadcast here from the studios that we've been working very hard behind the scenes. We apologise for the delay. I know that we pushed the time out for 2 p.m. It was this side. It's taken a lot to get this here. Myself and Travis were in the studio till 3:30 in the early hours of this morning. But I will say we have online, and you can see Senator Malcom from One Nation Party. And we just ask that you bear with us with the streams. We know that there may be some issues from time to time with the audio, but it'll be okay. I just want to move on and also introduce, we have Jammel and from Turning Point Australia, and we certainly have a couple of Joel's fans in the audience, part of my team, and they've said hello to Joel. But and also we have Paul Filing, a West Australian Senate candidate for One Nation, and we're going to get into some discussions of how things are looking for him. On the panel in the studio, we have Cam Tinley. Cam Tinley ran in the West Australian election for the Senate position as an independent. People in Western Australia in the Freedom Movement would understand Cam from the No Mandatory Vaccination Party, but he ran as an independent in here. And last but by no means least, Dr. Yunous Vagh. And Dr. Vagh and I did, in fact, the first stream in this studio, because we met at a polling booth, a pre-polling booth, and we had a conversation. I really liked what he wanted to resonate. He highlighted some of the issues that that we hopefully will be talking about today, in terms of in particular the Senate ballot paper. So on that note, I guess I do want to say I'm going to just bring up the stream so I can see your comments. We will try and bring some of your comments from live and make it interactive. Just bear with us because I just need to turn my head and drive a laptop off to the side here to do that. But I guess this came about, I had a couple of discussions with a few people, and really trying to make sense of where things are at, the state of play in Western Australia. And those that have been, I myself have been following a lot of the streams that Joel has been doing, Joel Jammel from Turning Point Australia. A lot of his information coming out during the election, was quite informative. And there's a real thirst out there pre-election to get some knowledge and information. But equally and most importantly, now that the election has actually occurred, there is an incredibly strong thirst to understand what happened. So I guess I would like to say hello to you all, and a quick hello to the audience while I set up the stream, and then we'll start with a few questions. So I'll start off yourself, Joel. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm humbled by the fellow panelists I'm on with. And
Senator Roberts.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
And Paul Filing.
Lindsay, thank you very much for inviting me onto the show.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and all extremely busy, and particularly yourself here, Paul, in WA. I guess close to the line, not quite there yet. We'll get in relation to that. Cam.
Yeah. Would you like me to? Be asking me to
say hello to the
audience. Hello everyone. Sorry about that. I as Lindsay said, I ran as an independent in this election. We wanted to run as a no mandatory vaccination party, but even before the election, we were going to take the our case to the Court of Disputed Returns, because they have sat on our application since January and have not touched it. And we should have been up and going by the election, and there seems to be no end in sight as far as getting registered. So a lot of parties have been knocked out, and I think it would have affected the result. Fred Nile got knocked out, Health Australia, and ourselves, DLP, a 60-year-old party, got knocked out, and it would have affected the result. But I'm really mainly concerned about the informal votes.
And Dr. Vagh?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay, for offering me this opportunity to come and talk on this panel, a very esteemed panel, and I'm pleased with that. My concerns were simply about the ballot form, which I will talk to about later. Or do you want me to talk about now?
So now I have the comments coming up there, and I can see a couple straight away. Thank you for those that are not only joining in Western Australia, and I can see there's some comments from people coming over, joining the stream from the East Coast, which comes back to the point that I said there's an incredibly strong thirst to get an understanding of what happened here. Perhaps, if I may, I'd like to bring you into the conversation, Joel, first off. I've been watching your streams, as I've said, and there is a lot of hype and speculation around the election. You know, was it rigged? Is it corrupt? And you have put your views out there. I guess if you could just expand those, Joel, that may, what do you say when people are saying to you that they feel that this election was rigged?
Sure. So I think that when it comes to the course of the last 2 years, it's highlighted the fact that the fundamental problem is people that haven't engaged with the democracy. And what we've seen the last 2 years is people realizing that, wow, the government can actually get away with a lot of these things. Now, as people have gone through this process over the last 2 years, they've slowly worked out that the way that elections are done is something that they're not particularly familiar with. Over the course of the last week or so, as the count's been going on for the election, a lot of people haven't fully understand, one, how to campaign for the election, but also two, how the votes are done after election day. I'm really glad that a lot of the opinions I've put out there, not being a candidate, I was able to clarify a lot of the problems people had with the election count. And fundamentally, these are probably the 3 or 4 things that people said most often. The first one that they noticed, especially if they were a scrutineer watching the count, was why is it that in the second count for the lower house votes, the green ballot, why is it that the major parties do a 2-party preferred count? Why is it that the AEC does a count like that? Now, before the election, I knew exactly how they were going to count it. In fact, it's documented in this book by the AEC, which I've taken my own audience through, called the Election Procedures Handbook from the AEC. And it documents exactly why they do it, for speed, and why they want it on election day. The whole reason why political parties do that is so that they can speed up the process to count the votes. In the third count done by the Electoral Commission, that's where they start to do the Topher Field marbles video, where they take off the last person until they distribute all of the candidates. But a lot of people, they didn't fully understand how the count is being done, and as a result, they had a knee-jerk reaction. Understandably so. I understand why they thought that. They've lost complete trust in the institutions, and that's unfortunate. And so that's where people like myself, people like Topher Field, and politicians like Malcolm Roberts have stepped in to help fill that void in understanding, because we're here to help. So that was probably one of the biggest concerns that I've heard when people said it's fraudulent. That one, it's not a problem with the 2-party preferred. Other things that have been thrown out there, and I don't want to hog the time, but other things that have been thrown out there is people saying there's been allegations of AEC workers throwing ballots in the bin, taking ballots home, which is not allowed, and putting them in the bin, and those things are still being investigated. Other allegations, which seem to have come up as true, include the fact that AEC workers have been insufficiently trained, and they have been giving incorrect advice, especially in Victoria, about above the line voting for the Senate. When you vote for an independent candidate like Morgan and Monica above the line, and Graham Richardson, they voted above the line, but they grouped themselves as independent. There's an empty box above the line where you can actually vote in it. And in fact, on the Turning Point Australia cards, we did put them down, Monica and Morgan at least. The AEC workers were not up to scratch on their training, and they gave out wrong information. And as a result, many people, and we don't know how many, but many people ended up doing the wrong sort of vote. Now, was it enough to change the election results significantly? I don't think so. But this is absolutely something that's reprehensible. This is people's most sacred right to cast a vote in their democracy. And to see this negligence by the AEC needs to be corrected for future elections. I think we all agree on that. And then there are a bunch of other allegations made about the Senate not having the proper writs written by the governors. Now, that's something that's way above my pay grade. I think that's how Topher Field put it. I'm not sure about that. I focus on what's in front of me and making sure we have scrutineers on the ground for the candidates to count the votes, and so that there's no election fraud going on. So that's sort of what I see going on when people address those 4 things. But I'll I'll hand it over to my fellow panelists.
And I think, thank you, Joel, for mentioning in particular at this stage for scrutiny is Paul Farling, yourself, you know, that is close for the position, and Cam's crunched some numbers there. I just also want to just highlight here that I apologise at the beginning and the outset. Craig Kelly was due to join us on this stream. It was to be Clive Palmer. Then Craig Kelly, when I had a few conversations with his media team, he certainly wanted to come into this, and that may still happen here. He may join through the stream, but he certainly, as you've just indicated, wanted to help in line with what Senator Roberts has been doing. You mentioned, Joel, that there is, you know, allegations and things, and I guess this is coming back to Cam. You know, and I guess we're trying to sort of steer this panel to focus to Western Australia, but we certainly appreciate your input. Cam, for yourself and Dr. Vaughan, both, so in your case, Dr. Vaughan, you were grouped in the ungrouped in the Senate at the end of the ballot paper, and Cam, you were grouped in Group P.
That's right.
Now, I know personally when I went to go and vote there that there was 2 unmarked boxes above the line in Group P, and I have there. I can put up a couple of videos to highlight this. In essence, in asking the questions, it was very clear that it was told to me personally, and the examples that I've got, that there is no candidate in that group. Cam,
that's right. Dr. Vagh and myself, we were both at the Boyer Primary School, and the reason, I'll just go into why I was there. Probably, I take a big interest in informal votes. The reason I do that is because I was a candidate in the 1996 Western Australian election. The Liberal Party had held the upper house for 100 years, and we lost the upper house at that election, and I saw massive problems with the Electoral Commission. Then, that was the West Australian Electoral Commission, seeing people, Pauline Hanson was very popular, people were writing "Go Pauline" or "Yes Pauline," and every time somebody did that, they'd throw the vote out. And it was a very close upper house vote, and Liberal Party lost it first time in 100 years. So since then, I've taken a big interest in informal votes. Also, I was brought up at Balcatta. I went to Balcatta Primary School and Balcatta High School, and those 2 booths had always had the most informal votes, 10% for decades. And I was very concerned that the Italians that lived around Balcatta could spend their whole life voting and never have cast a formal vote in their life, and nobody's ever taught them why. So I always look at the informal votes, and I saw that Boyer Primary School had passed Balcatta in informal votes. So I thought, well, I'll go out there and have a look for myself to see what was going on at Boyer Primary School, because it has the most informal votes. I didn't know whether it was the people voting there or generally what was going on, but it turned out that it was right. I'll just go through the informal votes for Boyer for the last 5 elections. 7% 2010, these are Senate. 9% 2013, 7% 2016, 7% 2019, and this election 17.5% was the informal vote in the Senate. Normally you have some consistency, but clearly this was right out of the park as far as the informal vote at that booth. People might think, well, that's in Mirrabooka and a special case, but it's not. Also looked at the Peppermint Grove, which is the other end of the spectrum. Their last 4 votes, basically 2%, 1.91% in 2013, 2% 2016, 2% 2019, and then 5% this election. So at either ends of the socioeconomic spectrum, you have a big range, big discrepancy, and a lot of informal votes in the Senate. I was at Boyer Primary, and people were coming out of the booth and saying what Lindsay said, that they said, well, I tried to vote, they were Christians, and I was on the Christian ticket. And they said, I got to this Tinley, Cam Tinley, but there's no box for him. And I didn't know what to do. I couldn't vote. I couldn't get any help. Nobody knew what was going on. And that's happening right across the board. People are commenting, I'm getting lots of comments about the fact that the Electoral Commission, people were saying that the box was blank and you couldn't vote there. So that's a real issue.
And being told by AEC
Yeah.
staff that if you vote in that box, if the voter knew that who the person was for that box and who it represented, AEC staff were telling him, if you vote there, your vote will be cast as informal.
That's right. And I'm concerned that they actually have been done that, because the informal vote in certain booths is enormous. Across the board, it might look like it's not that much different, but when you look at its individual booths, you can see massive problems. And the problems are also with the staff. Each election, you seem to have a new lot of staff, and they really do not know what they're doing. Rather than pay them a lot of money, they're already paying them a lot, but obviously not enough. If you have people that are experienced and go election after election, they know their stuff. These people, you can tell, are brand new. They do not know what they're doing. Even the people in charge do not know what they're doing. And at Boyer Primary School, we know that because we were having arguments with them. They were giving instructions which we knew were wrong. They were clearly wrong.
Can I ask Senator Roberts there that just hearing some of the data that Cam's just put there, for a current sitting member in Canberra, what do you think when you hear that?
I'm very concerned when I hear that, Lindsay. We've got about 28 questions ready for Senate estimates, just not in any particular order at the moment, but they're just notes that people have sent us or concerns people have sent us. This has been a very sloppily run election. So I'm not an expert on these things, but it seems to me that I'd agree with Joel that doesn't look like it's deliberate corruption, but it looks very, very sloppy, very poorly managed, mismanagement, if anything. We've had voting booths shut down in some areas and then brought back to life on the Thursday before the election, polling day. Short-staffed, people who didn't know what they were doing, advising wrongly about the independence, as Cam and Joel have already talked about. We wonder how much the injection mandates for injection mandates for AEC staff affected them, because there was a shortage of staff. There's no doubt about that. They were advertising at the last minute for staff. There was inconsistency over the eligibility to use telephone voting. It just seemed very, very messy, and it raises serious concerns as to whether the election was indeed fair.
And I think, Joel, as you mentioned, when you're saying, one of the most important democratic rights bestowed on people. I mean, people have fought and lost their lives for the right to vote. And it's caused, in history, our history shows the division, discrimination for the right to vote. And it's been established and recognised. It's one of the most powerful democratic processes that an individual can partake in. And you would expect, given that the outcome, the staff that we put, the Australian Electoral Commission, put their trust in to get it right, that it needs to be right. Paul,
yeah,
finally,
can I just say on that? It's not a point to be. I know we all appreciate how important that is, but we're putting into context. I know things are great now, but my audience, I'm sure Malcolm Roberts had the exact same situation, having to deal with so many people. The last 2 years have been absolute hell. And the only way to connect with your MPs, I've been telling people, because I've been helping to educate my audience on how to get change. It's been petitions. We've had the third or fourth biggest e-petition in history was done during this time. And it was that the jab rollout would, coincide with the rules of the Nuremberg Code. That was ignored. 309,000 signatures. We also had, people emailing their MPs, left unanswered. Calls going unanswered. Jab injuries going unanswered. In fact, Scott Morrison even was willing to. One Nation almost single-handedly held up the Senate so that they only sat for 5 days this year, thanks to Senator Antic and Senator Rennick from the government as well. They held them up for 5 days because they would not budge on jab injuries, and Scott Morrison would have rather lost the election than deal with that problem. I mean, and then I've been telling people do all of these things, petitions, emails and everything. The last thing they had left was their vote. And then the AEC pulled this stuff. I mean, no wonder people are annoyed. If there's one thing that's meant to last, it's your vote. And they spat on that right when they showed this gross negligence And it's funny. The AEC were more than willing to have an interview with me pre-election, but after election, they're not taking my calls. So I'm very furious about this. And this is only the tip of the spear of a lot of other people that are contacting me, and they are very upset. I mean, for them to have another opportunity in 3 years, some of them will not make it for 3 years. And they're very upset that this has happened. I'm trying to make sure that they get accurate information before, they make decisions of their own volition.
And hence the importance of a discussion like this, if nothing else, that we can put the information out. I mean, mainstream media, we have all seen the impact, particularly here in Western Australia. We know Seven Media Group have had an absolute stranglehold. They've essentially campaigned for Labor here in Western Australia, both at a state and federal election. And certainly, if Craig Kelly was here, you'd be talking about United Australia Party, the many, many hit pieces for Clive Palmer. Rather than play the ball, they played the man. And it takes an outfit like this, a team of dedicated volunteers to generate the much needed conversation. And Joel, it saddens to hear that you say, people are exceptionally pissed off, as you say, to use a better term, an Australian colloquialism term, but that, that some people just may not make that. And that to think that the impact of that and society just marches forward is just not right. Paul, can I ask you, with some of the comments that's been said, your experience today and where you're at, without trying to preempt anything, I guess, for the last position here in Western Australia, you're in the contest. What's been your experience?
We're still in the contest, and but it's going to depend on very close scrutinising of how the preferences are allocated. So we're calling for volunteers from the freedom parties to come and assist, because we've already seen instances where either officers of the AEC or members, people representing the ALP, for example, have acted in ways that are intimidating or at the very best, looking very misleading. So, for example, we had one of our scrutineers thrown out for not wearing a mask when it wasn't obliged to. There wasn't an obligation in the count centre, only for staff. And she was able to later return after having pointed out that the manual itself made that perfectly clear. So there's a good example of where someone who's trying to keep an eye on particular voting trends was excluded from doing that because she wouldn't wear a mask.
So, and I guess, we saw in pre-poll here on the northern side of the river, you're either north or south in this instance, that's Perth set up. We had Malaga, we had Morley, we had Balcatta, and we had the fourth one was, it's just slipped my mind here, Malaga, Morley, Balcatta.
Joondalup, will it?
Yes, Joondalup. Thank you, Ken. Joondalup. So now you had all of the pre-poll booths. You could just go in and vote. Balcatta, you went to go in to vote as a voter, and you would denied entry unless you put a mask on, with no mandates. Western Australia has just recently had the mask mandate removed, and we've been subjected to that probably not the longest, but the latest in terms of time in Western Australia. That disappeared, yet the AEC saw fit that people that turned up there were turned away unless they were wearing a mask. They simply couldn't vote. So I guess we can't underestimate the particular impact of that. That's really not so much what we want to talk about on this stream. Cam, you've mentioned the informal vote. We're talking again. You've mentioned some of the numbers there. Have you got any other insights that you can provide there, Cam?
Oh yeah. First of all, everybody was given the instruction when I went to vote, and everybody was given the instruction: vote 1 to 6 above the line. If you're going to vote above the line, vote 1 to 6, If you want to go below the line, you go 1 to 12. Now, it's not the job of the Australian Electoral Commission to give expert advice on how to fill out a ballot paper. All they do is cross your name off and dish out the ballot paper. That's their job, not to try to influence how people complete their ballot paper. And the advice they were giving is wrong by their own scrutineer's handbook, which I'll read it out. It's it doesn't take long. It's on page 38 of the guidelines, Senate guidelines. This is what it said. It's not long. For an above-the-line ATL vote, ATL, voters are instructed to consecutively number at least 6 boxes above the black line in the order of their preference, commencing with the number 1. Well, that's pretty obvious. Then, by voting in this way, voters are preferencing the individual candidates within a group in the order in which they appear on the ballot paper. However, where a voter consecutively numbers fewer than 6 boxes, including only 1 box with the first preference, the ballot paper will still be formal, but will exhaust after the last consecutive number. So you can put any numbers you like, as long as they're in order, on the ballot paper, and it's a formal vote. It might be an exhausted vote, but it's still a formal vote. So as long as people are giving a formal vote, and even if they want to vote informal, that's not a problem either. They can do that. But for the Electoral Commission to put in people's heads and minds that they are to vote 1 to 6 above the line, which is arbitrary, or 1 to 12 below the line, which is not completely arbitrary, but you can go beyond that, creates a problem, because we gave a direction or an advice to our members and supporters to vote 1 to 17 above the line. And so when they went in to vote 1 to 17 and they've been given advice only to go 1 to 6, it confuses them, and they're actually right. And that's what the Freedom Parties needed to do, was to go beyond 6. But by restricting them to 6, say Paul, in the case of WA, won't be getting preferences that he would have got if people had have gone down to 17, because a lot of these parties would have gone to all the minor parties. They don't, even on the left, the people don't like the major parties necessarily. And a lot of these animal justice people, that sort of thing, they would have voted for all the minor parties. And by being instructed to vote just to the number 6, it exhausts votes, and that's a big problem. A large proportion of these votes get exhausted. So I just had a look at some figures Lindsay put up there about voter turnout, and it's gone down to about 10% of people aren't voting. Then we get Boyer, where 15% are voting informal. So you've already got 25% their votes not counting. Then on top of that, you might get a 10 or 15% exhausted vote. So you're really getting to the stage where only half the people, their votes are counting. And so you question the validity of this system, and saying, that it's a compulsory election, you have to vote. Well, we're only getting the same number of votes counted as you do in countries that don't have a compulsory vote. So they're the big issues, and I think that issue of everybody being told to vote 1 to 6 above the line, a specific instruction which doesn't even need to be given, that's not in there, something they need to do.
Is this your name? There's your ballot paper.
Yeah, here you go. Off you go and do what you want. Yep. Put it in the bin, fill it out, draw a cartoon on it, do what, they don't say that. It's yours.
Yeah.
And then just make sure you put it in the box, in the right box, which some people put it in the bin anyway, accidentally put it in the bin. But that's the problem we have. And I think that's the biggest issue. We had an issue before we got registered. We were going to question the legitimacy of this election before the election because of the not being on the ballot paper. But I think this is much more important now. This sort of supersedes what we were initially going to the Electoral Commission about. I think it's the advice which wasn't needed.
And I will come back to the to the voter turnout, because I'd be interested to get the likes of Senator Roberts, his opinion, if he's had an opportunity. Joel, yourself, whether you've had an opportunity to look at that. But I just want to come back to our initial conversation, Dr. Vaughan, was at a pre-polling booth, and it's exactly the issue that Cam's talking about now, above the line, below the line. And I will say that, you are... well, your PhD is in computer science, but you studied medicine at a particular point. Numbers, you understand numbers. That particular issue of above and below the line, and the impact for you, what did that have?
Yes, that really raised an issue for me, and I agree 100% with Cam. For me, personally, it disadvantaged me I found that one of my people whom I instructed how to vote went into the pre-poll in Morley on Friday night, just before the election, and she reported to me that she was disgusted because some of the officer who gave her the ballot paper told her that she must vote above the line and not below the line, otherwise it will be an informal vote. Lucky she was informed. She knew what she was going to do. She didn't say anything. She didn't record it, unfortunately, but she went back and filled it as instructed below the line. Now, for me, below the line is important because I don't get a look if it's above the line. So I'm disadvantaged. And for me, that raises another issue.
It's just an empty box
It's
above
an empty
the line.
box, yeah.
An empty box with no... And I know, Joel, you mentioned in saying, was it enough to perhaps change the election? I'm not challenging what you're saying in respect to that, but Dr. Vaughan, you're mentioning one vote in this instance, and is one vote going to get you into the Senate position? No. But just looking at the comments coming through, there is plenty of comments coming through that people it's resonating exactly. They were told if they vote more than 6 above the line or in the empty box that it would be classed as informal, and that is a problem. And I guess, again, if I may ask Senator Roberts, what's the landscape on that side? What are people saying to you post-election in terms of the level of concern? I mean, surely in Western Australia, we can't be alone in our thinking here.
No, we've heard similar comments in Queensland, Lindsay, and also Joel pointed out very well 3 issues. The Saturday night, they do a count that's just to get a 2-party preferred. It's done purely for the media. That's it. No other reason. To give the media, the TV shows that night, some indication of who's going to win the election. So people, we told our candidates that. Our candidates were okay with that. But other people who were scrutineering have said, they're very concerned about that. There's nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about at all, because the proper count, as Joel mentioned, is done the next day, and away they go again, starting all the primary votes, and then they allocate preference, just as Topherfield showed in the video. So that was all okay. So what I'm saying, Lindsay, is that some issues were because people misunderstood. But there's enough evidence to say that the AEC was not professional in its approach, and people were misled. I don't think they were done deliberately. I agree with Joel that they were done mismanagement. It was very poorly managed. There were so many signs, and we discussed this earlier on. Joel did a very good job of summarising that. I added my 2 bobs worth. But also, I want to raise, Lindsay, some potential bias, because I'll give you some examples.
Sure.
2GB live on a broadcast, and I'll read these from the notes, advised their listeners that One Nation candidate Rebecca Harrison lived outside of the electorate. Rebecca had completed her AEC paperwork correctly, and this clearly showed she lived inside the electorate. This false information was supplied by the AEC to TGB. How did that happen? That would have cost Rebecca some votes. Second point, the AEC instructed One Nation to take down posts or videos on the Friday before the election for not being properly authorised. The one at the end of the video says authorised by so-and-so. Not having authorisations in the video in writing and audibly. These were, without exception, they were all reposts of videos posted as early as 1 year before the election. They had nothing to do with the election. So there's no specification as to what authorization may be added to a video immediately before an election. So we need some guidance on that. They were taking down our videos without any justification.
So I guess, Senator Roberts, what if I'm understanding you correctly there, you're saying the AEC has the stick. It can wield the stick. Why didn't it wield the stick 12 months earlier?
Well, if that's the case, but the authorizations really need to be close to the election. So why are they enforcing videos without the authorization that were made 12 months ago and reposted? So I think the AEC needs to understand what it's doing. And then we also had our electoral office, our headquarters in Brisbane, was asked by the AEC to take down 2 social media posts that used graphics criticising the COVID response. Neither of those were put up by One Nation. We didn't even make the graphics. We had nothing to do with it. They didn't even mention One Nation, but we were told not to post them and to take them down. So No One Nation account was involved. We had no knowledge of the post. So how did the AEC decide One Nation were responsible for that post? This seems like bias and harassment. So it's not purely mismanagement. If it is, it's on a gross scale, but Joel's already used that word. So I think I'm just lining up to say I endorse Joel's comments. They've been run very, very loosely. I will come back to Cam though. Cam, how many squares above the line in WA?
21.
21. Okay.
21 or 22.
Yeah, you're 17. It's fine.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we just.
You don't have to. You don't. Have, I think there's. You don't. I think the legislation says voting 1 to 6 you must have 6, but there's a saving clause that says anything less than 6 is okay. I see Joel's nodding in agreement. So there's nothing wrong with saying 6 and then accepting anything less than 6, providing it's 1.
That's right.
Yeah, that's page 38 of the scrutineer's handbook. It has it exactly that, the top left and the top right paragraphs. You'll see exactly it says that. I didn't believe it. I thought they changed the rules for this election, but it turns out it's true. So I'm not really worried about when those ballots go to be counted and scanned, because the computers do know the rules. It's part of the genius, the little bit of genius that the AEC does have. It'll actually cover for a lot of the ineptitude of some AEC workers that didn't actually know the rules. That's really good. But the problem that we can't solve is when an AEC worker gives the wrong advice to a worker before they cast their vote. If they've cast their vote and they've numbered the box above the line, no worries. The count, even if they discard it in the initial count, it'll be corrected later when it's scanned. But the problem is what happens before it. That's what I'm really worried about. Just that it's a very important distinction, but there is that savings provision.
And the other thing is what happens at the count, because we've seen instances where an AEC officer has mistyped the order on the ballot paper, and we had somebody who typed at least on 3 occasions, instead of putting us 1, they'd put us 4 when they were working off the scan. So this is something we've logged and looking into, but it was brought to the attention of the chief officer at the account centre at the time. But I mean, I'm from my long experience in politics, particularly federal elections, I mean, monitoring not only the AEC officers and then the ALP is a huge job, because the ALP in particular is absolutely ruthless when it comes to voting and the count. And it will use whatever it can to get the result it needs. And so consequently, they will badger, harass and intimidate others to try and get them to accept particular points of view on individual ballot papers. And that's one of the things we've been having to train rigorously our people, and we've got a large number of people doing the scrutineering. We've had a large influx of volunteers from freedom parties as well. So our main task has been to counter some of the things that the ALP, along with the Greens, but in particular the ALP, are up to. Because the AEC officers, being less experienced, as Malcom pointed out, in some cases, because of COVID, etc., they may have only just been hired, are more likely to be intimidated or overborne by aggressive, confident ALP scrutineers. I noticed today, for example, from reports that is, that after being told that House of Representatives candidates could not be scrutineers at the count, today we noticed a ALP member who'd just been re-elected, Josh Wilson from Fremantle. He was there scrutineering, and we queried that, and they then told us that, oh yes, House of Representatives candidates are able to be scrutineers in the Senate count. If you read the handbook, that's not clear. So a good example of where somebody rocks up, wants to be a scrutineer, and they've in effect allowed him to take on that role when it was implied to us that that couldn't happen.
You think by now, Paul, that they get that very much clearer than it is, because the way I read that, they're not allowed, if they're a candidate anywhere, they're not allowed to be a scrutineer anywhere. But
Exactly. That's exactly what we thought, Malcolm. And the trouble is, we play by the rules in the sense we've got decent people who want to come along and do the right thing, who want to ensure the rules are kept, up against people quite often who are paid union organisers or paid union administrators, etc., and party and staffers for ALP members who are hard-headed and determined real politic apparatchiks.
Yeah, if you're not within the black letter of the law, they come down so hard on you because you do not have the backup or the cover from other elements of government. I mean, in one of the polling booths that I covered in Parramatta, I like Parramatta not because it's just my electorate, but it's also one that I documented from start to finish to train my audience about how to campaign. We found an AEC worker, I called it Balloon Gate, where he took a UAP candidate's balloon off a child while they were waiting in line, and he went up to the UAP candidate, Julian Fayed's face, and he says, "I told you no balloons in here," and then he pops it in his face. That was the chief officer at the AEC working for Parramatta during pre-polling. I mean, this is what happens when people disconnect from their democracy. The left have gotten away with a lot because they've had this massive long march through the institutions, including the AEC. For future elections, especially the Victorian election, I'm really encouraging people, go and get a job with the AEC. Go engage in your democracy, even if it's just a part-time one. The more eyes and ears we have, the better it will be for all of us. And we can start to return some faith in what's going on and improve the running of these elections.
And that speaks to another point, and that is the overwhelming belief that there are only two parties that you can vote for in this country. And that's perpetuated by the media. As soon as the date for the election was announced, it was ScoMo versus Albo, ScoMo versus Albo, ScoMo versus Albo. That's all we had. And that's deliberate. Professor David Flint has said so on the show I have on TNT Radio. And we also have only the two parties being mentioned at all. We have the two parties being favoured by the AEC. We have sometimes bigger hurdles for the minor parties, Joel, to overcome to get in there. We seem to have favourite treatment for the big two parties. Fortunately, and this is part of the process, that has been caused because voters have simply accepted that the two title parties are there. Voters are now saying, okay, to hell with that, we'll look at who we want to vote. So I want to compliment you for what you've done in Turning Point, because you haven't just favoured any party, you've put them all open to scrutiny, and that's exactly what a democracy should be. We've seen an increased number of candidate forums in various electorates around the country, and that's been fabulous. Sometimes the Labor Party and the Liberal Party don't turn up to them. That's how arrogant they are. But we see more and more people now engaging, exactly as you said, with the voting process. I recognise your word, their sacred right to vote. People are now starting to recognise that they drop their old habits of, oh, hell, I've got to vote again. I'll just draw something on there. But now they're recognising that after the last 2 years, we have got to select responsible people who will represent us and serve us, the voters. So I think there's a big change underway. So we're probably starting to see a bit of pressure being applied by the public, which is exactly what should happen in a democracy. The pressure's being applied. That's a wonderful outcome from this election. We see that the lowest vote on record for both the title parties. More than almost 70% of people voted for someone other than the ALP to be in government. So some people might complain about that, but we've seen freedom parties with 15% or more of the vote. We've seen One Nation have the largest vote amongst the freedom parties. We've seen us getting potentially many more senators. So there have been some remarkable successes from this, but the AEC needs to really sharpen its game.
I think, there's no denying, and Joel, you've done many videos on this talking about the success of this election, and it's laying some great foundation for 3 years' time. There's two things I'd like to mention or perhaps just bring back. You mentioned get involved with the Australian Electoral Commission. how with the current narrative now, how is that balanced when there are voluminous people out there wanting to get involved, but because of one green tick on a telephone, a digital passport, they can't? How do we get around that?
Look, I can't formally endorse anything, but I know many people that work in the AEC that have tried to do it by any means necessary, whether that's because they have a legitimate or illegitimate passport. That's up to them. I'm only ever encouraging working within the black letter of the law, as I specified earlier. But we can't pretend for a moment that that's the only way to help our political process. Everyone should be becoming a member of their own political party. In New South Wales, before this election, in the 2019 election, there was something like 0.5% of people were members of political parties in New South Wales. 0.5%. You know, people always complain about being ruled by the 1%. Only 0.5% of New South Wales, it was something like 30 to 50,000 people were members of political parties. Those people in those political parties are voting on what policies their parties take to the electorate, you know, which candidates are getting pre-selected, you know, what the leadership should do going forward as a vision to take to the electorate. I mean, the average Australian people, in fact, my audience of 260,000 people, the majority of them before this pandemic were not in political parties. But now that they're flooding the political parties, it's phenomenal. So I've always said, I don't endorse any single political party if you want to become a member of it. I've said, go join the Greens, as much as I hate them. Go join the Liberal Party. Go join the Labor Party. Go join the 10 freedom parties who I'm always plugging. But what it's doing is it's giving politics a better cross-section of Australia. I think that politics needs more average Australians in it, not less. And in fact, we could see a situation, if enough people joined some of the major parties, even the Greens, I'm not endorsing that 100%, but it's conceivable that the Greens could become a pro-nuclear party in terms of nuclear energy, because that's a way to reduce emissions. I mean, this is a sort of thing that could happen if people went and joined politics. But it seems as though after this election, the greatest success we've seen have been people joining the freedom parties, especially One Nation, and all the freedom parties preferencing each other. And that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. I don't see any reason why that should change for the upcoming state elections in New South Wales and in Victoria. But we need more involvement from people, not less. And I think that people getting engaged, whether it's joining the AEC, joining a political party, having those difficult conversations before the elections, that's probably some of the best things you can do. And over the course of the next 3 years, you know, I'm not in it to lose it. Every single person that used the Turning Point Australia How to Vote cards, and there's over 200,000 of them, we will be going to every single politician that won. We'll be putting them on notice and saying, listen up, this is how many votes of people didn't put you first. The major parties this election have lost over $10 million in public funding because your vote, it's not worthless. It's worth $2.90. And you guys have been very successful that are listening right now in defunding the major parties by over $10 million, and that's still being counted. The majority of that being from the Liberal Party. So well done to you guys. Kudos to you guys. But there's more work to do. We've only got the foot in the door with the Senate. We are doing very well. And as we see these freedom senators get up over the course of the next 3 years, asking some phenomenal questions in Senate estimates, like we've always seen Malcolm Roberts and the other senators do, I can't wait to see what happens. So this is a message of optimism. There's plenty of work to do. We've learned a lot from the elections, but I'm really optimistic for the future.
I just want to jump in there, if I could,
sure.
Lindsay, and endorse what Joel is saying, and especially the vibe on the polling booths. Every polling booth that I went to along the east coast of Queensland, you know, it's very, very positive. The UAP, One Nation, LDP, IMOP, all working together, helping each other. And the clear message from that, it was just such a wonderful message and a wonderful energy. The clear message was, Australia comes before my party, and I'm doing this for Australia. And that's what elections are all about. And that was absolutely fantastic. That's a breath of fresh air instead of the partisan politics. We saw that vote for Australia, preferably One Nation at the top, but make sure you put the freedom parties in the 1, 2, 3, 4, and put the majors last. And people did that. They actually did that. So that's wonderful because of that cooperation between the parties.
I think it almost was a case of the Freedom parties having to form an alliance, if you like, because whilst it may have been a pleasant experience amongst the freedom-friendly minded parties, having to go against the likes of the well-funded Labor and Liberal machines, and Paul, I think you mentioned the CFMEU involvement. That was very evident at the polling booths that I came down to, and it quite intimidating for a person wanting to go down there and cast their vote, do their the Australian thing, and the as you said, Joel, the sacred right to vote, and then have to run that line and have this brochure, that brochure, this brochure from the likes of Labor in particular. And I guess, I mean, I will call it out. For my personal observation, at the 4 booths north of the river that I went to, it was thuggish. And we see the mainstream media have come out and talked about United Australia Party voters were rude, disruptive, aggressive, abusive, to a lesser extent One Nation, and then you've got the independents and so forth, where on the ground there are many examples of Labor volunteers being verbally and physically aggressive. But I guess that's putting a different light in what you're saying, that it's it's a great outcome, it's good feeling. So it was almost a case of corralling the wagons together just to fight for survival. I mean, some candidates.
Well, I think it's more than that, Lindsay.
Yeah.
I mean, it just means we have to be as robust as they are, because I mean, politics is not a game. It's not a gentleman's afternoon activity.
But politics shouldn't come to push to shove.
It's warfare. It's warfare.
It's a warfare, and I do subscribe to that the rationale of what you're saying there. And Joel, you mentioned the vote costing money, and it's potentially cost $10 million who've taken that vote away, from the major parties. I've got some data up on the screen here, and I apologise that we can't get it to yourself there to see. And I'm coming back to the voter. I'm just going to bring that up now. The voter turnout. So now just sort of running through there, I guess in Cam's, I see him casting his eyes over that. We can look at Cam. If we go from 1922, we had 59.38%, and then 1925, we had 91.38% voter turnout. Would anyone want to have a guess as to what why the big jump there?
Compulsory vote.
Yeah. Compulsory voting. So we see from 1925, we're looking in the 90s, in the 90%. And I apologise that I can't get this information up. You can go onto the AEC website. Some of this information has been updated, and they've now posted this here. So it's all there for you to see. If you look at AEC elections, federal elections, /voter turnout, you'll look at this data and you can see what we're talking about. And I'm skipping right down now through to in 2019, it's 91.89% voter turnout. So what we're looking at, the data at the moment that's coming through on other sources of that the voter turnout seems to be around the 76, 78%. So we're talking about 15% in terms of downturn of voter turnout. That's people not voting. That's not informal. That's not voting. So 15%, 15% of $10, it's $1.50. It's neither here nor there. But 15% of those that are registered to vote, you're talking in the order, I mean, is it roughly in round terms, about 4 million voters. So now these 4 million voters, I mean, I look at this, the $10 million offset that it's cost the Labor Party that for the vote not to go is offset with $20 fines. And I think it's anywhere from 20 to 222. But let's take $20 at 4 million votes. That's $80 million. That's a massive offset. And if it's $222, which some of the information on the AEC website suggests that the penalty has gone up, and I tried to seek clarification on that before I started this stream, but at $222, it's touching $880 million.
And it's not actually 291. I think it's 391 per vote.
391. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So I mean, Dr. Vaughn, does this make sense mathematically? You see the issue here. You know, 4 million people chose not to vote.
Yeah. Can I
Sure.
I just say something, Lindsay? I think the other side of this is this is what I think's happened. When the voting was just on the Saturday, it was like a grand final. Everybody got involved and everybody's getting all the information. Bang! It's like final day. The easier they've made it to vote, the less people are turning up to vote. It's because it's extended, which is very harmful to the minor parties, because we can't be manning all the early polling stations.
Absolutely.
And fewer people are turning up. So you've got two problems. So this early voting is not working. It's very negative because it draws out the process is drawn out rather than a sort of a fever pitch to election day. And some people, it sort of lulls along and they never really get into the excitement of the whole event and don't forget to cast their vote. And so they can't say that they're making it easier. Otherwise, these numbers would be in reverse. They make it easier to vote. Well, the numbers should be up towards 99%, but you're getting the exact opposite. So this early voting is not achieving what it's meant to, unless what it's meant to do is harm the minor parties, which is probably what is the intent.
Clearly what it's doing. It disadvantages, you know, you're talking Liberal Labor again in the booths that I covered, you know, they had 4, 5, 6 volunteers on rotating shifts from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Many of them declaring openly that they're being paid to be there.
They are paid.
Being paid to be there. And we look at Cam, we'll probably go back to 2019 and from the state election side, Paul, filing, but you may remember this, we had the by-election in Western Australia. And that caused, they anticipated a reduction in people turning up because they had to go back and do it again.
Yeah, actually, I was giving out how to votes at that Mundajong. Well, I was at Mundajong when the Darling Range by-election occurs. I was giving out how to votes for One Nation on that day, and that was incredible. These people had been coming every 12 months for an election, and rather than getting browned off, they were getting more excited about it. They were getting the how to votes, and they were sitting around the school and reading and really making a decision. And I thought it'd be the opposite. I thought they would really be angry about having to turn up because they, you know, their members had been, you know, thrown out for various reasons. But they were very enthusiastic about the whole process. So that was great.
Senator Roberts, I've just discussed the numbers there, and I apologise again that I can't get that up there. What's your impressions when you hear that potentially 4 million voters did not vote this election?
I looked at the figures because you gave us the rough page. So I looked it up on Google and got it. You know, if you look at since the year compulsory voting was brought in, it's been 95, 96%.
Yeah.
Sometimes down to 94. It's been consistent. And now this election, it looks like it's a hell of a lot lower. So there's no doubt pre-polls hurt the smaller parties. There's no doubt about that at all because we don't have the manning, and we don't have the, you know, we just don't have the manning to do it, and that hurts us. I think we've got to look at that. I think we've also got to look at this how to vote cards being handed out, because people look upon that and they go, oh my goodness, I've got to run the gauntlet. No thanks. And that puts people off. And let's face it, there are people walking up who don't know how to vote. If they don't know how to vote when they get there, then they're not going to make a very good decision in the booth. So we see more and more people refusing to take a how to vote card because they've got it on their phones. Or they've done their homework. They know what they're going to do, which is great. So why have how to vote cards being handed out? Why not just have them on a table somewhere and stop this intimidation, the thuggery from the Labor Party, some of these union bosses? So that'd be great. We don't need 2-3 weeks. The last election was 3 weeks. We don't need 2 weeks of this election. We don't need to go till 8 p.m. at night. It's an exhausting day for volunteers.
Oh,
we only need,
absolutely.
I think we only need one day for voting, and maybe a couple of days on pre-poll, and maybe the previous Saturday. If that, I get the people on shifts, So just make it some allowance for that to happen, but it doesn't need 2 weeks, and it doesn't need the how to vote cards being handed out. Just inform people. That's up to us as candidates to inform people, not the Australian Electoral Commission.
And it comes, you know, back to again, when you're saying people on shift workers, those that may be away, those that may be hospitalised or know that they have a procedure coming in, whatever. I mean, that's what the postal vote was trying to capture for. But we turned up on that day. I remember as a kid going with Dad. You know, it was the day to get you know, as many sausages on a bun before the bun sizzle that I could eat. It was like a smorgasbord. You know, come on, son, let's go, and you know, fill your boots while you're there. So you know,
well, Lindsay, I think there's something else too, and that's with the postal votes. Why are parties able to distribute that? That's, you know, that's one thing. But why are parties then asking voters to send it back to the parties? That's completely wrong.
Well, we definitely saw that, and it sounds the same over there. And Joel, I'll ask you for, you know, any feedback you had there. You know, here in Western Australia, we had the Liberal Party. It was your postal vote application form with the AEC address. That's not the issue, but it's with compliments from the Liberal candidate. And then you have Labor here in Western Australia, and I'm sure similarly over east as well. Labor is sending them out, the data harvesting the information, and you're finding people are completing that, sending it in. And then Labor went, and if you're talking about the AEC, and if you're talking about looking, Malcolm, you've mentioned the authorised by tags not being on videos and being directed and taken down. How is it that the Labor Party can register the domain howtovote.org.au? Incredibly misleading. Those that are trying to seek the information and inform themselves of the voting system, go and type in how to vote, come up with a web page that looks like the AEC, and it's not until the very bottom that you see that it's authorised by the Australian Labor Party. I mean, it's
that's deception.
It's deception. Dr. Vagh, Joel, comments on that?
Yeah, so that was a really interesting thing about the postal voting. So what we first saw this in Queensland, where One Nation, I think it was Pauline Hanson, blew the whistle on this on her Facebook page. She made the point that a lot of the, you know, advertisements that were coming about from the Liberal Party and I think the Labor Party as well were basically, you know, you'd have basically a form in there, or even a QR code or a link to a website where you could put your details in and actually apply for a postal vote. Now, the return address for that was actually not to an official AEC address, it was to the Labor HQ in Queensland, or it was the Liberal HQ in Queensland. Now, in New South Wales, when I looked at it, I'm very happy to see that the Labor and Liberal Party did not do that. They did it, but the return address was the official AEC place. But they did hijack the use of postal votes to encourage their voters to have a postal vote. And the website, if you see this QR code at the bottom, if you scan that website and you go to it, there's no branding particularly clear for the Liberal Party. It sort of looks like an AEC website. And when you fill it out, the real question is how much of this information is being shared with the political party? How much of it am I going to be bombarded for future elections? Because, guys, I know you throw your email around a lot online. I used to do it with one of my junk mail emails. But your email is actually gold to them. It really is. If you have, you know, if a political party has 80,000 emails, that is gold. And often that's traded with other parties, other interests to bombard you with campaigning for state elections, for federal elections. So we're really worried about some of these breaches in privacy, and especially for elderly Australians. And that's the sort of thing, dirty tactics that we see playing out. But just picking up on something that was said earlier, the election, as Professor David Flynn has said, is meant to be a snapshot of the electorate in history. One day. Now, it has not become that with early voting. It's become a drawn-out process over weeks. And I do want to say something to the contrary. With early voting, with manning the polling booths, I've actually found that, you know, often the Freedom parties did better in pre-polling, early voting, than they did on election day. Why? Because what I actually found was that, especially with Julian in Parramatta has anywhere from 40 to 50 on voting day polling booths. But on pre-polling, there's only 1 or 2 open. So it's a lot easier to outman them and match the Labor and Liberal Party resources. We often found that in pre-polling that the Freedom parties were doing a lot better in matching the major parties. But on election day, we found that we didn't have enough volunteers to man all 40 to 50 polling booths, so it was a lot more difficult. But look, regardless, I don't think we should be having early voting. It should be for very, very extraordinary circumstances that you get a mail-in ballot. We should be turning up to the voting booth, and we should be voting on election day, because I think that's what the founding fathers intended when they set out the electoral process like this.
And we talk about early voting as well. We look at an issue. So the Liberal and Labor, Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese, were flying all over the country. They came into Perth more than I can recall seeing ever a Prime Minister coming to Western Australia, the opposition leader coming to Western Australia. And day by day, the news cycle and the policy cycles, and apart from the slinging match cycle, was constant. The potential people are still trying to take in that information, and they may have voted very early on, and then all of a sudden a key policy, something that resonates to them, has now been announced, and now they can't take back their vote. I mean, I guess if we were to have a referendum on a particular issue, what do we do? Do we have 2 weeks of referendum where it may be influenced? No, we go on one day, we ask the question, we give the answer. How much of that has an impact and a play in that as well? That essentially, as you're going in to vote pre-poll, and you could go in and say, I voted for this, or I'm not voting for them, and then something happens in the news cycle well, hang on a minute. I mean, where to then? What, Cam, your thoughts?
No, I was just reading the comments here. I just wanted to say it's giving the impression that we might be bashing the electoral commissions and the government, but the reality is we deal with other electoral commissions such as West Australian Electoral Commission. You couldn't meet a more professional lot of people, a nicer lot of people. People are really keen for minor parties to be up and going, and they're so helpful. And all of these problems that we've been discussing today with the Australian Electoral Commission, I've just never. It's completely opposite. There's no need for it to be like that. We're getting accused of bashing and coming up with conspiracy theories and this sort of thing, but that's really not the reality. They could be doing their job a lot better, and all of the things that we've raised today are absolutely legitimate areas of concern. Everything we've discussed, needs to be taken on board too. And I just wanted to bring that up because I can see the media trying to paint us as being Trump-like as far as the election was stolen and conspiracy theories and tinfoil hats and this sort of thing. But we really do have very legitimate concerns about
You're
the way.
the only one with a hat on.
What was that?
You're the only one with the hat.
I think Paul said you're the only one with the hat.
Oh, yeah.
I think also, Cam, that when someone starts labeling you as a conspiracy theorist, it means you're close to target.
That's right.
Yeah.
When you copy
I'd
flight,
always-
you're over the target.
I was going to say that I think that if ever you're contemplating whether it's a conspiracy or a stuff-up, I'd prefer the latter. The former is very, very hard to organise, requires precision execution, and usually lots of planning. And in this case, none of those seem to have been present within the AEC.
Yeah, with the AEC, I think a lot of the negligence that has been done on an individual basis with workers coming in, often with very little training, it's a lot of it's due to the shortage. I mean, I saw someone throw out the figure of they were short 100,000 workers. Now, I don't think that's the case. I think it was a lot, but I don't have an official number on that. But there is no doubt that there were a lot of people in our community who could not get jobs there because of the jab mandates. And the AEC would have been a lot less short-staffed if they hadn't had the jab mandates. And the same goes for all those teachers. Supposedly in Sydney right now there's 18,000 teachers protesting. Now, whether they're jabbed or unjabbed, I don't know. but the workload wouldn't be so bad for them if they didn't come down so hard on the jab mandates, because then there would be greater supply of teachers. I mean, it's just, you don't have to, you could ask a year 12 economics student about supply and demand. And when it comes to what's happened at the AEC, it's the same problem. I had people 6 months before the election contact me. They'd normally worked with the AEC every year previously, every election previously, to help out. And they warned me that they're worried that they won't be able to work with the AEC because of the jab mandates. And that's exactly what's happened. So, the AEC, honestly, they need to get their act together. I don't understand. Turning Point Australia can only do so many things. We try to plug the holes where we see them. I do not understand, with all the lawsuits that happened over the last 2 years, why not one lawyer basically argued on proportionality, the fact that AEC workers shouldn't have to be vaccinated. I mean, if you have unjabbed people coming in to vote, then on proportionality, why should the AEC workers be jabbed? I mean, it makes no sense. And so when I hear them complain about not having enough workers, I'm like, guys, cry me a river. If it was really that bad, you would have dropped that mandate. It's irrelevant.
Or look
Well,
at
any guide here, Joel. I'm 66. I've got a pacemaker. I'm currently suffering from COVID and in isolation. And
I think I should say, welcome, Paul. I
mean, the vaccination thing, as we all know, was is little to no use to anybody. And most people who are unvaccinated who've suffered COVID have not sailed through it, but they've managed to get by. It's a serious case of the flu. And I suspect the vaccine mandates in years to come will be reviewed and looked at as a very serious breach of Australia's human rights. And there are going to be some very serious class actions on behalf of businesses and employees and others who've lost and suffered financially or elsewise as a consequence. And the Royal Commission proposed by Malcom and Pauline is going to be absolutely vital to that. I cannot understate it enough, or I should say overstate it enough. It is an incredibly important thing, because they need to have the light shone on all of those decisions that were made. And the AEC's requirement for vaccination for its own workers is a good example of it. There were unforeseen or foreseen consequences, amongst which was the fact they'd be putting on new, inexperienced people. And of course, there'd be people who were more partisan than they normally would take on, because they were so desperately short of workers. WA has got a severe shortage of workers anyway, so it meant that for the AEC it was particularly serious. And of course, with the mining boom continuing, it's sucking out workers out of other occupations. So to expect people to go and work for whatever the AEC was paying for their staff probably meant they were going to have to lose out elsewhere.
Well, not only the mining industry sucking other industries' staff in Western Australia, but your way, Senator Roberts, Queensland, there's plenty of people here in Western Australia who have up and left and gone to places like Queensland simply because mandates are no longer in place in terms of that, and it's what people are having to do, to get by. And I guess for the AEC to maintain the narrative, let me put this to you then. If that's the case then, and you're talking about proportionality, and there's been many questions that Senator Roberts, you've put in Senate estimates talking about that very exact issue, why could the AEC not think outside the square? Why could they not risk manage, and take a proper risk-based approach to setting up centres that can cater for these staff who can have the experience and can do this? And it's not just AEC. We could apply this to healthcare. We could apply it to our community services. We can apply it to the NDIS, screening for carers, qualified carers in the NDIS system, and we're probably moving more into policy in that now. But why could they not think outside the square here and set up centres where They can advertise the stuff. They don't have to, who knows, we're not going to get told the full story. Put these people in, put them there, and manage the risk accordingly to how they are choosing to manage the COVID risk themselves. Give those people the opportunity to still plug back into the system, but it seems to just cut off at the knees, and that's the issue.
I think we know the answer to that, Lindsay. This whole COVID last 2 years has been grossly mismanaged, inhumanely mismanaged, and we know that it's not about managing the virus. They're using the virus to control people. They're not managing the virus. They're using the virus to control people, and we've seen that the Prime Minister has said repeatedly earlier this year there are no vaccine mandates in this country. Oh, really? Tried telling that to the people who've lost their job. And
Yes.
that did enormous damage to him. But if you look at the facts, this is a long way of answering your question. If you look at the facts, Scott Morrison is the founder of the National Cabinet, which is unconstitutional. But he started the National Cabinet. He leads the National Cabinet. He chairs the National Cabinet. So having said that, he bought, as the federal Prime Minister, 280 million doses of these injections. The states couldn't inject people if he didn't give them to the states. The states couldn't inject people if he didn't indemnify the states. The states couldn't inject the people if the National Cabinet didn't endorse it. The state premiers have said that their decision to mandate the injections at the states is in line with the National Cabinet. Who has the National Cabinet? Scott Morrison. The state governments could not have mandated the injections, but for the fact that the Australian federal government's health department provides them with the data that enables them to discriminate people. So that's the Australian Immunisation Register. Scott Morrison and his party and the Labor Party both voted against the bill I introduced on behalf of Senator Pauline Hanson to outlaw discrimination based on injection status. I mean, this is one record after the other of these people working collusion with the Labor Party, the federal Prime Minister working with the Labor Party at the state level to mandate these injections. And then the icing on the cake is defence in mandated injections, AEC mandated injections, aged care, federal aged care mandated injections, Border Force mandated injections. It's a complete lie that Scott Morrison has said that there are no injection mandates. Not only are there, and everyone knows about it, but they're spread by the federal government.
And the National Cabinet, which was in reality a handball of responsibility from himself to the premiers, has resulted in the greatest transfer of power from the legitimate power held by the Commonwealth to the states, and finally came back to bite him at the federal election. Because if you were to look at it and say, what was one of the constant themes throughout this, it is the continual avoiding of decision-making by the Prime Minister. In other words, he was acting like the proverbial stereotypical politician and avoiding being associated with decisions. The best example of that was the court action by Clive Palmer, where 1 minute Scott Morrison is supporting him and the next minute he isn't. And then later he's got his own people turning around saying, well, we didn't really support that.
And I think
it destroyed Christian Porter.
Well, and many things, and you're talking about, I read an interesting article today for the ABC and talking about, the hit piece with Christian Porter and the way that the ABC went around that particular case as well. And that was quite written by Sky News. The ABC, the Australian broadcaster, taxpayer funded, and I was going to go into that, and thank you for bringing it up, but I would like to, I would firstly, again, thank you all for your time. If I may, I'm just going to put the call out. If I can ask for those watching the stream at home, can I ask the panel, can we get some Q&A? I'll just put a call out now. People can put their questions, sure. And I can take some questions. Is everybody happy with that?
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
and
fine.
while to give some people some time to do that, so I will just be turning my my site off to the side here. I just want to put this interesting little piece of discovery, if you like, and just get some comment. Well, particularly Joel and the panel, and just see. So I found a report, and it talks about the Economist Intelligence Unit Annual Democracy Index 2021. So I'm not sure, it's something I've mentioned a couple of times on a few streams, but it's where they rate full democracy and the countries that are defined as full democracy. And what we have there is that in 2021, there was 9 out of 21 countries that were part of that or fed into that report that were classed or classified as full democracies. So that's 12.6% of those particular countries. So there you're saying, 6.4% of the world's population cannot consider themselves to be living in a full democracy. And then when you look at that and you take it one step further, United States of America has not made that index classification since 2016. I mean, it's some comments on that.
And they want to sell full democracy to other countries.
There we go. So I'm going to try and pick up the comments as we come through, and let's just see. Okay, one comment here. I guess I'm just going to try and slow it down. I might just have to do it on the laptop to slow it down if I can.
Hey, Lindsay, did you want us to read the questions out to you?
Okay, I will pick up this one from Rob, and it's an asking, and I know Senator Roberts, you've mentioned plenty of this, and I did actually have a speech here which I wanted to play talking of you. And really what this was all about, fighting for democracy. And it's talking about the opinion of the WHO and the WEF agreements. That do you feel that the reversing of the Lima agreement may happen, or better that Australia may exit those agreements?
I think it's better that Australia exit those agreements by far. And if you look at the World Health Organization's international health regulations orders, we've checked the provisions, and one of the things is that the World Trade Organization can impose, if we don't adopt them, assuming they get through this week in Geneva, and there's doubt that they will, but if they get through and we don't adopt them, there is a provision for enforcing trade sanctions. Now, if you look at Australia 70 years ago, when the UN was formed 78 years ago, Australia was an independent, vibrant country. We supplied most of our own needs. We met most of our own needs. We had advanced manufacturing. We manufactured tool-making equipment. We exported around the world. We were known for making lathes. We were known for making just about everything. We could make our own armaments. Now, after 78 years of progressively becoming not independent, but becoming interdependent, that's code word for becoming dependent. Because if I am interdependent with someone else, that means we both depend on each other. So Australia has lost its dependency, and that's exactly where the UN wants us. They want us dependent on other countries, because if they put a trade sanction on, then we'll be gutted. So what we've got to do is recognize that COVID is not a 12-month exercise. It's not a 2-year exercise. It's, as someone said, it's at least 10 years in the planning, simulating. We've got to recognize that it goes longer than that, because the way that the UN has got grip over our sovereignty now, it's taken 78 years. So we are no longer independent. That means we're at the mercy of the UN. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have got to oppose these World Health Organization rules, orders, and I have a lot of hope here, because my office, we defeated the cash ban bill simply by getting together with the people and putting pressure on the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. They both passed it in the lower house. They didn't want to touch it in the upper house, because we interacted with the grassroots of the Liberal Party, and they put pressure on. We need to do the same with the World Health Organization, but I think we need to do the same with getting out of the UN altogether. Just get out of it completely. We have water policy that's one of the aims of the Water Act from 2007 under Malcolm Turnbull and John Howard, is to enforce international agreements, compliance with international agreements. What has that got to do with our federal legislation looking after our country? Our energy policy is driven by the UN. Our property rights for farmers have been stolen by compliance by John Howard and John Anderson with the UN's Kyoto Protocol in 1996. Everywhere the UN has got its grubby paws into us, and we need to get right out of the UN altogether. So I stand by what I said in my first speech in 2016. Just get out of the UN altogether. It's not good for us. It's bad for our country. It's hurt our manufacturing. It's hurting our agriculture. It's hurting every aspect of life. Family law came from the corrupt, crooked, dishonest UN, and it's devastated families in this country. They're, everywhere you point, the UN's got its grubby paws, and we need to get it out of this country.
And I think Donald Trump, while he was president, demonstrated that globalism is a perfidious influence, and the UN is part of that particular movement. And I think Trump presaged the downfall or the decline of globalism as a international phenomenon. And Malcolm's dead correct. The UN is becoming more and more irrelevant, if ever it was particularly relevant. Sorry. I recollect being in Sarajevo when they were under siege, and I can remember being in the old Holiday Inn building, and that was under the command of a French UN colonel. And during the night, I think it was one side was firing missiles over the top of it, and the explosions were keeping the colonel awake. So he summoned the Serbian and the Bosnian militia commanders and told them to move it. So they shifted it into some other poor bugger's suburb. That was peacekeeping for you. 101, the UN in action when they're doing a job that most people think is perfectly benevolent.
And Lindsay, just another point on the World Health Organization.
Sure.
It has got a large component of private funding associated closely with the makers of the COVID injections. I mean, that's a complete conflict of interest. And now they're trying to push forced injections onto people through the UN and have control over our sovereignty. That's another abrogation of our constitution and a violation of human rights and violation of basic human bodily integrity and autonomy. The UN, World Health Organization, is largely privately funded. That tells you everything you need to know.
And I can say that I've seen at a number of things, and Joel, you may have also seen this, following this from Turning Point Australia as well. And I know he's not here and he hasn't been able to join us, but Craig Kelly also holds the same view. That the United Australia Party were talking about withdrawing, that we need to withdraw from this. They oppose what they're trying to achieve in terms of the International Pandemic Treaty. And, you know, there's been plenty of videos that have been circulated where that's gone on record there. If I may, I'm just going to take a comment here from Lee, who's watching the stream. Those in Western Australia will know Lee, the umbrella people in here. So to set the scene, Joel and Senator Roberts, so Lee heads people that stand every day down at outside Governor's House in St George's Terrace, Perth, and they press the buzzer and they call on Governor Beazley to issue fresh writs, something that I've never seen before in my lifetime, every day religiously. Asking for the writs here. That's the state of play here. So his question is that the talking about the writs and saying, you know, what comment can you say that the Senate, they were signed by the Special Minister of the State, Ben Morton, up until the 20th, and yet on the 23rd, the copies of the writs appeared on the AEC website signed by the Governor General.
Yeah, I don't know enough. If I don't know enough about something, I just won't comment because it's just an uninformed opinion. I don't know enough to even give an uninformed opinion. We have got a couple of people in our staff who are very good at this kind of thing. They're going over all the complaints. They're logging the queries about the AEC. So that's something I'll defer to them, and we'll do that in due course. So if I don't know something, I just admit it. I'm not afraid to admit.
I'm in the same boat on that one. I've had a lot of people ask me about that. I've spoken to Rod Cullerton on it. I recognise there's a lot of people that are concerned about that. Again, above my pay grade. If I was to get an opinion on it, I'd be asking Professor David Flint, Augusto Zimmerman, and also Dr. Stephen Shavira. They're my go-to guys for all things constitutional. And it's pretty rare that they disagree on something as fundamental as that. So I'm seeking answers on that as well.
Well, I thank you for you know, the openness there, that a typical politician answer, which actually I'm going to take a question from somebody that's actually here in the studio, somebody that's certainly volunteered all of his time, equipment, and that's to get all of the network infrastructure to bring this stream. Senator Roberts, if I can ask you, is it possible for a politician to give a yes or no answer?
Yes, it is.
So that.
But sometimes the issues are so complex that we have to qualify them.
Yeah.
But I quite often give a yes or no answer.
I can see him smiling here, that so it's certainly in agreement, and that would resonate, I guess, with a lot of people. We certainly saw, I had opportunity to bump into Anne Alley. She was the lower house reps down at the polling booth in Balcatta, and also Vince Connolly. Now, not only did Anne not answer questions, of course, unless you have a journalistic pass issued by 7 Media, or in this case in Western Australia, Mark McGowan issues the press conference personally to go and attend any political press conference at Parliament House. And Anne's first question was, I want to see your pass, and I'd love to show her that pass, but Mark McGowan's never going to give that to me. But then Vince Connolly, I put a number of questions to him. I put the same questions to both candidates and simply did not answer. Vince answered, and it wasn't a yes-no answer. And but there we go. So I said that I would try and get that in there. Brian, thank you very much, mate, behind the scenes, for nodding for what you've done. Just trying to pick up a couple more questions here. Perhaps, Travis, are you mic'd up there? If you can, because I'm just trying to see them float through.
I have to say the questions are coming through thick and fast. So we got, what I'm thinking is we get people to re-type their questions in, because we are seriously getting these are going insanely fast. There's one here from Bryden Burnett. Has there been any talk of CBDCs? I'm really concerned people will allow the digital money to happen without truly knowing the consequences.
Sorry, CBDCs?
Yeah, go on.
No, I was just clarifying. It was CBDCs. What's that?
Yeah.
Did you want to throw that over to the guys in the studio? It's like a digital currency or a social credit score.
All right.
Well, I'm definitely against all of those things. I'm very skeptical about this digital currency and even cryptocurrencies. I think it's a very dangerous situation, and it takes the ability of governments to effectively create their own money. And if it all goes to this digital currency, governments are going to it's going to be impossible for them to pay back debts. The debts are climbing around the world, and if you can't use you haven't got the ability to create currency, you might never be able to pay that debt back. It's a really dangerous cycle. But I don't know. It's not my area, cryptocurrencies and all these things. But I'm just very concerned about it, particularly the digital ID. I mean, that's just horrendous. That's all.
So looking here, so
digital
currently more than
identity.
60 central banks are at different stages of research and implementation of CBDCs or their central bank digital currencies, with different forms of digital currency. So just to give a bit of insight there.
I think Malcolm Roberts had something to add on that.
Yeah, the digital identity bill, we've done a lot of work on that. We've analysed it fully. We've written a briefing paper for me. I can't remember all the details, but it is definitely heinous. Parts of that bill, the explanatory memorandum, have been copied and pasted from the World Economic Forum's Digital Transformation Program. Copied and pasted. This has come from the World Economic Forum. The cryptocurrencies or the digital currencies have been researched by the Reserve Bank of Australia and many other central banks. They're also involved in a protocol of having a global cryptocurrency. So there's your global governance. If you can control that, you can control global governance. They want to get rid of cash. They want to then put it on. It's an extension then to getting your. They want to control all of our independent individual identities, data, so they could sell that to a foreign corporation without the protection of Australian law so far as your security of your data is concerned. And then, for example, Lindsay, if you want to check your health records, you'll have to pay someone for the right to, for the ability to check your health record. That the company that buys your digital identity and your digital record can sell it back to you. So this is about control. The other thing that's in there is potentially then it gives them the opportunity for social credit score. And if you notice yesterday, someone from the World Economic Forum, Alibaba's senior executive, said that they are very close to finishing work on an individual carbon dioxide, what do they call that? Carbon dioxide score. So if you've exceeded your score, you want to go on a holiday, tough luck, Joel. You can't go on a holiday because you've exceeded your score. That is about controlling your food. It's about controlling your travel. It's about controlling where you work. It's about controlling what you say. Because once you get up to your social credit score and you say any more, we didn't like your post last week on Facebook, you're docked so much in social credit. Then they come up with a living wage, a living income. Then they say, okay, here's some money for you to live on. Oh, that sounds good. I don't have to work for it. I'll take it. Then you're hooked. That's it. It's like a mousetrap, Lindsay. This stuff looks good, and the cheese looks free to a mouse until you suck on the cheese. Then you're dead.
I guess
so you can get into this, but you can't get out.
Yeah.
This is one-way traffic from the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. Look, they've made no secret about it. They've talked about that. Klaus Schwab has said that he has infiltrated, the World Economic Forum has infiltrated governments around the world, especially Western governments, and they control some of those governments. Greg Hunt, who is responsible for bringing in quietly, people don't know it, an emissions trading scheme, the Foundation for Emissions Trading Scheme, and a global carbon dioxide trading scheme to give money to the United Nations. Ultimately, that's what it's for, so they can have their own budget. He brought that in thanks to Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister in 2015, slid it through both houses of Parliament. He pushed a lot of the climate nonsense without evidence. He's also been the health minister when COVID struck, or rather when the government struck over COVID. He was World Economic Forum's Director of Strategy in 2000 and 2001. Senator Hanson Young is a graduate of the World Economic Forum's Global Young Leaders Program, as has Liberal Senator Andrew Bragg, as have Macron, and the President of France, Merkel, former President of Germany, as has Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, Ardern as Prime Minister of New Zealand, Boris Johnson as Prime Minister of Britain. They all issue the same slogan, Build Back Better, what's the other one? Great Reset, the New World Order. They all issue those same slogans within hours of each other. This is all coordinated. There's no doubt about that. And then you look at senior figures in the UN and the World Economic Forum, openly admit it. Openly admit it. They're coming after us. That's why they had to get rid of Trump. And that's why they have to get rid of third voices in the Australian political scene, because they control the Labor Party and the Liberal Party and the Greens. They don't want a third force coming up. That's why Pauline Hanson was jailed. That's why she's been booted around. That's why the media have preyed on her and given her hell, because they don't want her to survive. But we're going to survive. And what we're going to do is we're going to be linking more and more with the people. We don't care which party they voted for. We are putting Australia first, and that's what we will do. We will stop this heinous World Health Organization regulations, and we'll stop the United Nations. But it's got to require a flow around the country from people, individuals like Joel was saying a little while ago, your workmates, your social friends, your family. Spread the word.
And you say, Senator Roberts, mice or mouse to a set trap, and the trap is well and truly set. You just need to look at the conditioning. Who has a Woolies card that they scan every time they make a purchase, and then next week your metadata pops up. The specials that you bought last week are advertised at a price this week cheaper. And then that will be linked to your card that you scan at the register with a daily carbon emissions score. And when you breach that, you can't tap your card anymore. So you're already entrenched in the system. I guess we've heard in Western Australia in particular, and I'm not sure what the state of affair is on the East Coast, but here, record numbers of banks and small banks closing, record numbers of ATM machines slowly going by the way. So funneling people into central systems, and then all of a sudden you can't, you can't do anything without cash. You're stuck. And then with your card, if you haven't bought what somebody's agreed and said that you can by their scale, well, you can't buy food. You just can't buy food, and it's as simple as that. And people are falling for the trap. I'm trying to pick up some other
Lindsay,
questions.
That leads to another question.
Sure.
How would they do this? Well, look at the fact that they have put an untested substance injected into 95% of Australians. Untested.
Well, and I guess what that does is it causes people, and the mandates is part of that as well. So people need that. Trying to maintain the system, everybody would like to wind the clock back and say, let's go back to 2.5 years ago. But will that ever happen? No. Do we need to? In my view, no. We just need to understand the game and take a much broader, holistic view of what you're mentioning. The traps are there, they're set, and just simply look at other means of doing that. And I guess that bring back cash, and that's part of the system there. They're trying to do that. You look at the bills which you've mentioned, Senator Roberts, introducing a cash transaction. The bank don't ask me how I get my money when I put it in there, but then for me to go out and take over $10,000 and it's anti-terrorism, money laundering, that type of thing, that's one thing. But then to say, if I want to pay cash and I've earned that in blood, sweat and tears, and I want to buy something for $11,000, that it's an offence for me to pay cash to the tune of $11,000, and it's an offence for the person to sell it to me. I mean, there you go. Just another way that you get caught in the trap. So I'm just trying to pick up the questions again as they come through. Travis, I'm sorry if you've got.
There's a couple of more coming through here.
So while you're finding one, I just want one that came up and talking about, if we're talking about renewable energies, and I saw a really good tweet by Senator Matt Kavanagh, who's also, amongst the same that Joel you mentioned earlier, Senator Gerard Rennick and Senator Alex Annick, and Senator, of course, we have Malcolm Roberts and Craig Kelly when prior to the election. Renewable energy, he tweeted, talking about that. I thought renewable was to save costs and make electricity cheaper, yet a question came through saying our energy costs 18.6% increase, certainly in Western Australia. And where's it going to end? What is the solution? And this election, it was climate change, I guess you're talking about from the Teals, but cost of living. That's the issue that people were looking at. And does that message seem to have been heard?
I think we're going to hear a lot more once this the COVID situation, starts to wind down. It's hard to believe that it will. They're going to really crank up this the global warming side of things, and the World Economic Forum are really are going to be pushing this, and they've got off lightly. World Economic Forum, and even Scott Morrison, at the last Davos meeting of the World Economic Forum, on the closing day of the forum, the opening address was given by Scott Morrison. Now, the Australian media. This was in the middle during the campaign. The Australian media cover everything that the leaders do during an election campaign, and there was not one word mentioned, not one word anywhere about Scott Morrison addressing the World Economic Forum. And it's a legitimate target, and we, as a freedom movement, we've got to bring more focus on that group because they're clearly running the show. Klaus Schwab is clearly running the show, and the average person has never heard of him. It's a ridiculous situation. It's hardly conspiracy theory if you have a prime minister addressing, and as you said, Lindsay, the number of world leaders there are who are part of this organisation is unbelievable. but they're really going to push the renewable side of things. And this result, as far as the teals are concerned, was incredible. I mean, I don't know how the Liberal Party is going to survive this, because there are other seats that they could have lost as well. You know, this revolution. And the thing people don't realise is that when these votes changed, they're talking about voters swinging and this big Green vote, you know, as if Liberals are voting Green or there's a switch, but I don't think that's the case. I think what you've got is the older people, the traditional Liberal voters are dying, and, you know, you hate to say this, but coming through the schools are these kids that are totally, all they're concerned about is the environment, or what they're told in school. And they are becoming a bigger voting bloc. Your traditional Conservative voters becoming a smaller voting bloc, and incrementally this Green vote is going to keep on going up. And as the Green vote goes up, people are going to pander to the Green movement and bring in more of these, just push their agenda. I think we're in a very dangerous situation. Unless we can attack the Green movement, I think we're going to be in enormous trouble.
Yeah, you're totally right, Cam. One of the really things that really drives my passion is trying to attack the factory of all bad ideas, that is the universities. I think what's happened where the long march to the institutions has taken place, everyone gets trained through the universities basically, unless you're a tradesman. The amount of priests, the amount of teachers that teach your children, the amount of staff in the HR department, everyone's going through the universities and they're pumping people out to society. The hope was that the radicalism, the radical leftist Marxist teachings would be contained to the universities. That's not what's happened. The last 10 years has revealed that it's bled into the HR fields. We need gender quotas on the actual boards of some of the major corporations. I mean, this stuff is spilling out into the world. So Turning Point Australia over the next, now that the election's concluded, not only will we be refocusing our attention to the Victorian election, but in the meantime, we're also turning our focus to the universities, setting up chapters, just as it did in the USA. That's where it started. And to help captivate and present an alternate view for young people. It's not that they're averse to the conservative view. It's just that they don't hear it. And so that's really what needs to happen. I used to be exactly. I used to be a Bernie Sanders supporter during the 2016 election, believe it or not. And what converted me out of it was actually giving an ear to the other side. And then I became a conservative. And so a lot of young people, they are looking for a younger, hip version of conservatism. And that's and the tough part for a lot of the older conservatives is allowing for those younger conservatives to come in through. The problem with young people, and I'll say this, I'll be the first to say this, got a lot of energy. They can often be very naive when it comes to politics. But if you can get that balance right, if you can get that perfect balance right of, innovation, but also, not giving them so much rope that they end up running off too far with it. If you can get that balance right, then you can actually do exactly what Trump has done in the USA and make it cool to be a conservative again, and actually have a more prosperous society. So I'm turning my focus to the younger people in the country, even younger kids as well, who actually are surprisingly interested in learning about how the democracy works. We should be having civics classes in schools. A lot of schools do have that as a part of the curriculum. I mean, I know I went to a very good school that had that, but in other schools, they do a very poor job of it. And I think that everyone should be learning how to do that, along with other things as well, which should be taught, other than the gender theory stuff. People should be learning how to do their taxes. They should be learning how to do community service and make Australia a better place. But instead, we see a lot of this radical ideology. We see under the guise of anti-bullying legislation or curriculum, we see them teaching about, radical gender ideology. And, full credit to Mark Latham from One Nation in New South Wales. He's been standing up against that. But yeah, look, the youth definitely need stronger advocates on the conservative side to help change minds.
So, Dr. Vaughan, I heard
if I can make a contribution as well,
yeah.
Lindsay, when you finish there.
No.
Did you want to
Oh, sorry, I just said, Dr. Wong, you were saying something then. That,
Yeah, I just resonated with Joel there. It's gender fluidity, which they're teaching in schools. It's coming under the safe schools and the anti-bullying policies. I mean, you can actually look up on the internet to find which schools are actually safe schools and which schools are not. So safe schools comes basically under that gender fluidity education. So you have to look up and see where you want to put your kids. And fortunately, most Western Australian schools have signed up to the safe schools, but are not implementing it. So that's the good side of it.
Yes, yeah. And I guess to touch when you're talking about the universities, and I think that probably the most striking, easy to understand example that I say, a couple of years ago when we had Rebellion Extinction and we had the Black Lives Matters protests here in the streets of Perth, Western Australia, and we had schools standing children down for the day to go in and protest on an action that they just did not understand. But their teachers said, you need to go and protest about this. And I mean, it's just, you know, and we can't get the same schools to take the stance because the level of indoctrination is the infiltration is, it's strong.
Yeah, most kids are very impressionable at that age. So a teacher, if he's if he's got very strong views, can influence those kids.
Mm. And Senator Roberts, you were wanting to raise further to that?
Yes, I'm not too upset by the Teals taking the woke Liberal seats. They're largely woke Liberals that they've taken. Tim Wilson, Trent Zimmerman, Dave Sharma. Senator Sezelja's seat is under threat by a pseudo Green. And I hope he wins the seat. I hope Senator Sezelja is successful in defending that seat, because I would not like to see the person who's going to oppose him in there. But then I want to raise Josh Frydenberg. Josh Frydenberg's lost his seat. Now, Josh Frydenberg is a skeptic on this climate issue, or at least he started off being one. But as his seat became more and more inner city Greens type, rather than standing up and discussing the evidence, he started invoking climate change and supporting climate change. Now, this goes back, and the Liberals will not get themselves out of this mess until they wake up to the root cause of this. John Howard, as Prime Minister, he did 3 really seriously bad things as Prime Minister and led his government into 3 seriously bad things. The first thing, they said they would not sign the Kyoto Protocol from the UN, but they would comply with it. Now, to do that, that meant shutting down industry. They knew that the public wasn't ready for that in 1996. So what they did was they stole farmers' property rights to stop them clearing vegetation. That is a clear breach of one of the most fundamental things of a true Liberal Party, secure property rights. They stole farmers' property rights. What's more, Lindsay, they went around the Constitution, Section 51, Clause 31, and went to the state governments and empowered the state governments to do it. They funded the state governments to do it. And Beattie from Queensland is on record as admitting that in writing, exchanges of letters with John Howard. Now, what the second thing they did was, and John Howard has admitted this, he put in place the renewable energy target, which has gutted our coal sector, gutted and brought in the renewable energy, the unreliable intermittent energy. The third thing he did was he put in place a policy for an emissions trading scheme on carbon dioxide. So it wasn't Labor Party that was the first to have that policy. It was a Liberal Party under John Howard and John Anderson. And what's happened since is that we have our electricity sector has gone from the cheapest electricity in the world to one of the most expensive, purely based upon what John Howard did. Now, to cap it off, in 2013, 6 years after he was booted from office, he addressed the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which is a largely skeptical body skeptical on climate change in London, a very well-known body. And he addressed them in their annual lecture for 2013. And he said in that lecture, after putting in all these policies, supposedly based on science, he said he was agnostic on the climate science. He didn't have the science to back it up. This is not based on science. This is based on bullshit. It's based upon the UN calling it, pushing it. Now, then if you go to the Liberal Party, the Labor Party 30 years ago had lots of factions, unelected factions running the show, undemocratic, and everyone laughed at them. They eventually got those factions. I think they're very damaging, but they got them to be somewhat democratic. The Liberal Party has now openly stated and admitted that they are riddled with factions in New South Wales, but one or two people control them. Alex Hawke is reported in the media as controlling them. Scott Morrison is controlling them. The Liberal Party is now worse than the Labor Party. The Liberal Party has brought its own demise. They picked woke candidates, and they got smashed in the election because the Liberals deserted them, and the Teals took over. I mean, the Teals are not much better, but at least they're honest. So the Liberal Party also appointed the lady from ex-Microsoft, ex-Twitter, who's had all her life basically in government relations, and she was appointed to be our e-safety coordinator, e-safety director. And she was speaking at the World Economic Forum just a couple of days ago, advocating that we need to recalibrate freedom of speech. We might have to take away freedom of speech. This is serious stuff.
Yes.
This is vital stuff to our country. First of all, John Howard and John Anderson steal farmers' property rights. Their government steal farmers' property rights. Then we see factions controlling the Liberal Party. And now we see someone advocating, appointed by a Liberal government, recently reappointed for another 5 years, advocating for removing free speech as part of something she says to address polarization. Because she feels there's polarization. She feels there's polarization. This is complete crap.
Yeah. In the whole country, there were only 2 seats that the Turning Point had of vote cards put the Liberal Party below the Greens. And that was Scott Morrison's seat and also Alex Hawke's seat. Because we felt that these 2 people, not only do we have a policy of trying to reduce the margin and put them below Labor, but we felt that these 2 candidates were so reprehensible in what they do. And I think they've got the 8th and 9th safest seats in the country. So they've got like 18, 19%. That's like 69, 70% of the vote, guys, just so you know. They are so reprehensible to the management of the political party, the Liberal Party. The level of allegations, the level of evidence that we'd seen against them as political operatives was just so reprehensible. We put them below the Greens because what they do, the way it works, guys, there's 3 or 4 factions in the Liberal Party, and Alex Hawke is the man that essentially gave Scott Morrison the numbers in terms of votes to become the Prime Minister in the past. And so to see who's really pulling the strings on that, we definitely want to see someone like Alex Hawke out of there. I mean, what they did before the election to Matthew Kamanzuli, who's one of the head people in the Liberal Party, was absolutely reprehensible. They did captain's picks, which is where people that had kissed Scott Morrison's ring and agreed with Alex Hawke and were a part of the Hawker crowd, they become the candidates of many of the seats that they ended up losing. I think there were 13 seats. I think all of them but one, the captain's pick, Scott Morrison's pick, all of them but one ended up losing. And so what that essentially meant was they were completely undemocratically chosen by the political party. Instead, the federal Liberal Party ended up coming down on them. And that's the real key here, guys. These people, they will do whatever it takes to hold on to power, even to the detriment of their own party. And it's disgusting. But you know what? Australians are waking up to it. Thanks to technology, we're shining a light on it. And we're seeing other parties get up because of it.
But,
His whole entry.
I'm trying
Scott
the
Morrison's
comments.
whole
I
entry.
am seeing the comments come through.
Through pre-selection. The rort that happened there was absolutely disgraceful. You know, and Senator Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells documented that or spoke about it in detail, excruciating detail in the Senate just a few months ago. I mean, it is just absolutely disgraceful that someone like that, someone who's followed a process like that Scott Morrison followed to get pre-selected for the seat of Cook, was just astounding.
Absolutely.
All right, guys.
It's fair.
Thank you for speaking up, Joel. That was very, very well said.
All right, gentlemen, we just going back to one of the other conversations we had, and this lady was also helping us with all our testing. So I feel it's really important to make sure we get her question up. It's from Jody, and earlier she was talking about free speech and what is the process for Australia getting Julian Assange home?
Paul, do you want to take this one, Paul?
I was trying to think of the the actress who was visiting him for a while from Baywatch. Well,
Yeah, rings a bell. I've lost it. Not sure. I know George Christensen's been very active
anyway.
on the Assange front.
Well, I think George.
yeah, I mean,
has said a few things there, and Anthony Albanese has been saying pre the election that he was a supporter of bringing Julian back to Australia. So it'd be interesting to see what he actually does.
there's a counter view.
Yeah.
That some of the leakages that were made by Julian Assange led to the deaths of some very good people operating deep inside intelligence networks in the Middle East.
Yeah, this is it's not an easy issue. It's very complicated, but the overarching thing is that our country, he's a citizen of our country. We should be protecting him. That's the overarching issue. That's up to the federal government. But to counter what you're saying, Paul, he has apparently, I haven't done the research on it, but he has done nothing illegal, and he has busted some serious abuses in the United States, in the United States surveillance networks. So he's really stood up for the people. On the other hand, has he broken the law? So I've got to confess that I haven't done enough work on this. It's probably something that I will get into fairly soon. I hope it's not too late, but we can't do everything. And so we've only got 2 senators, and we punch above our weight in the Senate. So I've got to confess that I haven't done enough for Julian Assange, because we've been preoccupied by other things like COVID decimating 25 million people in this country. Not COVID, government decimating 25 million people in this country. That's pretty well consumed us. And then the UN taking over through climate, trying to control people. But there are a number of questions that I am going to be asking about Julian Assange.
And hopefully is that question number 24, Senator Roberts, of what you're intending to take to Senate estimates?
No, we've got 28. I've added another 4 in the course of what Joel's raised and Paul's raised. 28. That's purely on the Australian Electoral Commission issues. The 28. We've got many more questions. We've still got 40 odd questions not answered from the on Therapeutic Goods Administration. So we've asked something like 180, 200 questions of Therapeutic Goods Administration. In Senate estimates, we're still waiting for 40. Some of their answers are extremely sloppy, but we persist.
What is a woman?
All right, we've got.
That's easy.
We do have another question here from another of our helpers from last night, Vagh. She's been saying, with the way they have set up the votes and what she was advised, is it possible, or how do we organise to get a re-vote after all the mistakes, whether it's due to intentional corruption or sloppiness? How do we go about getting a re-vote in the current federal election as it's happening?
I think One Nation already did the work on this before the election. I think they already pushed for audits to happen automatically after the election. Correct me if I'm wrong, Malcolm.
No, what we did was we proposed an election integrity bill, and we put it into the Senate. It was defeated by Labor, Liberal, Greens, and Nationals. But what we're calling for, there's no federal election ever in this country been audited. What we proposed was an audit beforehand to make sure the systems were correct, and then an audit after the election to make sure the systems were complied with. And we involved some of the best cryptologists in this country, best mathematicians in this country in developing that bill. They were very happy with it. Now, what happened, to give Ben Morton his credit, from Western Australia in the seat of Tinley, and the minister assisting the Prime Minister, Ben came to us and said, now that he knows where we stand on this election issues, he would like to take our bill and reintroduce it with a couple of very minor changes. And I offered him my staff to help him. And that came back with very minor changes. But he took out the voter identity, which Labor Party is terribly scared of. They don't want voter identity because they like voting more than once. But he took that provision out and was thinking about bringing it back separately. And lo and behold, Joel, our election integrity bill got up. Sorry, it came back in for the Liberals, so it got up. So this is the first election that we will have an audit before and an audit after the election to make sure it was done properly. So we're not so concerned about those things, and we don't have electronic voting. We have electronic scanning of a manually entered Senate paper, but the rest is all done manually, so that's okay. So we're more concerned about the sloppiness of the AEC in the way they're executing things. So we're going to be asking questions about, will the AEC submit themselves to an audit from the Australian National Auditing Office? But while I've got the microphone, I just want to say how sad I am to see Craig Kelly leaving Parliament, and I just want to pay him a huge compliment, because that man has stood up and he's done a lot of very good work. He worked always for Australia in the Parliament, and he gave me questions and material in Senate estimates that I could ask when he was in the Liberal Party. He wasn't being traitorous to the Liberal Party. He was recognising that I was the best one to ask those questions, and he needed them asked and answered. So Craig Kelly is an honest man, a very data-driven man. He's very objective. He's very fair. I enjoyed working with him. I'm going to be very sad not to see him in the Parliament. So he's a very, very good man.
Yeah, can I just weigh in on that as well? I did some work for Craig Kelly in that weird period when he was an independent this time last year, between March and June, just working on his social media. And I on my Google account, you can actually get notifications for whenever someone's a phrase is mentioned. And so every day I would get an email saying how many times an article came through, mentioned Craig Kelly. The amount of articles written about this man, you would think he's the Pope. Honestly, you have no idea how it averaged to something like 8 to 12 articles a day, just hit pieces, and many of which were copy and pasted from someone else. And the sheer visceral reaction that journalists had to this man, I don't understand how he put up with it. I don't know how he must have some of the thickest skin, similar to Pauline on this, because I just can't believe it. You don't realize until you're getting those constant reminders every day. Imagine being that guy. And on top of that, he managed to also help lead the UAP. Unfortunately, he didn't end up getting up. But it's going to be a huge loss, not only him, but also George Christensen from the lower house. I'd really hoped he'd run again for his seat. But when it comes to the lower house, it's going to be a little bit difficult now that we don't really have two lower house MPs. One, to put a bill forward, and two, to actually second that. Usually it was Craig Kelly and George Christensen. So that's going to be tough now. We've really only got the member for Kennedy, Bob Catter. And we've also got the member for Petrie, who also voted for Craig Kelly's bill.
Howard.
Is it Luke Howarth? Yeah, Luke Howarth. And so it's very important in the next election to see if we can get some lower house members up, maybe in the electorate of Hunter, maybe in Parramatta, maybe up in Queensland as well. But yeah, look, Craig, you did a great job. You fought the good fight, and I hope that you do have somewhat of an active role in politics as a commentator or even a politician in the future.
And I want to jump in on what you said about George too. George, I didn't work closely with him. I knew him and respected him and liked him. We've had some work together in the last few weeks. He's wonderful to work with. He's just such an easy person to work with. You know exactly where you stand with George. He stood up and done many things in the lower house, and he wasn't afraid to have an argument, but he was always civil and respectful in how he went about it. And just like Craig, he backs his arguments with data, hard data. You know, it's like a minute ago, Paul and I disagreed on Julian Assange to some extent. That's the beauty of politics. When you've got strong people, you can differ, and rather than this kowtowing bullshit from the tidal parties where you must conform, that just damages democracy. Paul's been in the parliament. He knows that you've got to have vigorous debate, and the most vigorous debate should be within your own party. And sometimes that can be public. It doesn't really matter so long as the issues are being aired. That's what democracy is about.
Well, and some of the most important discussions, that's the beauty about science. We should hear both sides of the opposing hypotheses that either faction put aside. You have one sense trying to prove a theory and another scientist trying to disprove a theory. Dr. PHON, you know, that's probably your area of expertise in you know, but we're just not getting that. We're just not
we're not getting that. We have to have questions all the time. So as you said, one side of the theory, there's also disproving the theory. So researchers and stuff look into detail all of the facts before, and then launch their position, which we call position papers, on whichever theory. So we have to actually look in depth and then make a position and challenge it. And the people who've written, say, for example, papers on a theory supporting the theory must be able to accept that challenge and refute that challenge if necessary. So that's the give and take of research and science.
And I can say a man who has some published journal articles on the particular subjects.
Well, I've basically, my thesis has been in agriculture, where I've actually used statistics to predict wheat yields in the southwest growing region of Western Australia. What I found there is that one particular thing I'll bring up there, it might not be related to the issue of challenging theory, but one issue that I found is that farmers can't actually grow their own seeds. Farmers actually have to buy their seeds from the agriculture department. It is shocking to learn that. And I learned that while I was doing my PhD. So we're moving to a situation where we won't be able to grow anything. You won't be able to grow your own seeds. You won't be able to do anything. You'll have to get it from the government. So again, it reaches back to that control and that overreach. So it stifles everything.
I wonder if that explains why the rise in the legalized cannabis party in terms of this election. But I just want to come back and say, talking about Craig Kelly as well, and not that we can really say much as a thanks from Freedom Media WA, other than when I heard, and that goes for Pauline Hanson as well, that both potentially were coming forward. Craig gave his time to us, an independent platform. We simply can't compete with mainstream media, but we did get on the press list. He made that happen for that press conference there, and received a number of comments and trying to find that I'm having to justify why we were actually there, and it was a little bit disappointing to I guess perhaps have to explain that it really should be recognised. We had then a sitting member of Parliament who came to Perth and allowed an independent platform like Freedom Media to ask the questions. But for that, I certainly it's a sad loss. But we have moments like this with yourself, Senator Roberts, and hopefully many more discussions that we may have. So we certainly we have seen many comments come through, and it's been fast-paced behind the scenes. Not that too many tech issues, which has been a good thing. But I guess personally, like to thank every one of the panel for, and have we scratched the surface on this particular issue? No, we haven't. Is there more work to be done? Yes, I suggest there is. Certainly, I, like many other people, will be following the stuff that Joel is putting out, Joel Jammel on Turning Point Australia. And he's certainly, whilst tomorrow I'll probably be painting the other side of the studio, Joel's, got his finger on the pulse in terms of that. So, Paul, one last closing comment, just to make sure that that you're still with us there. Any updates on any figures coming through of how scrutineering is going for you?
Well, let's put it this way. The One Nation vote has increased, or the prospects of the One Nation vote were preferences to flow as predicted in their how to vote cards. And the Labor Party, which is our principal opponent for the 6th spot, their potential vote, including preferences, has declined a little. So it's going to take some time, and little by little, it'll become clear. But we're very confident still that the combined force of the Freedom parties is going to see a Freedom candidate elected, as opposed to another Labor Party member who represents the tyrant of the Labor Party, tyranny of the Labor Party, elected in the place. The interesting thing I saw the other day in the West was them portray the Labor candidate for that spot, the third spot, or the third Labor spot, I should say, as being a wonderful woman. And then right at the end, I was being trashed as anti-mandates and also accusing McGowan of being a Nazi. So, and being 66 as well, which obviously made me an old man as well. So I had to smile when I saw that. That's a good example of where the West Australians are philosophical liners at the moment. And I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised.
Well, I wouldn't say at the
Sound
moment.
like
It's
the
been
right
the
person
case
to
for
be
the
in the
last
Senate.
2.5 years. That,
Yeah.
But I guess thank you very much, Senator Roberts, for your time, Joel, Jammel, and Paul Filing, who hasn't been able to join us in the studio today. Those that missed the stream earlier, Paul is at home recovering from COVID, I guess, but still, as you can see, up and able to monitor what's happening there. We did hope to have Craig Kelly here, and I got a phone call that something's popped up there. He certainly wanted to make his time available. Cam, thank you very much.
No problems. That was great.
And Dr. Ward for coming in. Those of you at home, the conversation and the discussions does not stop here. It does not stop with this stream. As you've heard Joel say, and he's pushing that message out there, the time to make a difference, you could say, actually starts now. So that for two gentlemen that ran as independent senates there, the importance of getting perhaps Paul Filing, up is they can do help. Cam, you're not asking for volunteers for yourself now. You know that what the outcome is. How you got there is questionable. But I guess hoping that Paul does take that.
Yeah, for sure.
That spot.
Well, the funny thing is, Lindsay, Cam and I were colleagues together in the Young Liberals in the mid-1980s. Now, he looks a lot younger than me, so God knows how old he was then. But we were on the same side then, and we're on the same side now. So it's always a great thing to see him.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Lindsay, can I just say before I head off, thank you for hosting this. Everyone that's listening, give us a share right now. I think I saw there were roughly 200 people watching. If you all shared it, you would translate that into about maybe 5,000 to 10,000 views, which is excellent. Volunteer, get it out there, give us a share. But after this election, please take a break. I know Malcolm Roberts and myself will definitely be taking a break in our own time, and I'm sure Paul will as well. Please take a break, guys. Remember, spend some time with your family after this, and remember why you're fighting. Last thing I want is for people to be getting overly anxious. God knows I am slightly, because of how much time has been dedicated to this. So remember to look out for number one as well.
Definitely. And look,
thank you very much, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Great effort.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I guess Travis,
Nice to
or
be
just
with you, Joel.
in terms of signing off
Pleasure.
on the stream, that
And you too, Malcolm.
that's so I will, just before we sign off, there was a couple of questions that Travis read out, and when he said that some people were helping us last night, I just want to reinforce, we were here till 3:30 in the morning this morning, proving and testing all of this. We had a number of things to sign out. We didn't want a one camera stream. We didn't want a two camera stream. We went for a 3 plus a webcam. We had a couple of interface issues, and we tested a stream last night. We went to air at midnight, and we had a number of people jump on, and we found an hour and a half later, due to their feedback, that we're able to bring this as close to, well, it's gone quite well, Travis, from behind the scenes. Aaron, we have Aaron Malloy also helping there on the tech issue. So it's not trying to pick out, cherry pick from the questions. We really would love to ask more, but there's a lot of people that have made this whole thing happen, and which is great, and onwards and upwards. So we'll be taking the rest that you say to take, Joel, and that's it's called sleep deprivation. And but thank you everybody that's joined here. Continue the conversation. As Joel said, please share this, get the message out. It starts here now. We cannot let some of these things and some of these issues, enough pressure. And I come back to, Joel mentioned this in the very beginning of the stream, there was enough pressure, not that you want to spear people, but change can happen. The balloon incident, popping a 4-year-old's balloons, in the face of a UAP candidate resulted in change that the AEC had to take action. And as something as simple as that, we're talking about more than popping balloons here. With some of the discrepancies and the issues that the AEC have found themselves having to provide answers. So enjoy the rest of your evening.
Hang on, Lindsay, just one last thing before everyone signs off. The scrutineering for the federal election is still going on. Yeah, this is for poor filing. So if you do live in WA, you do have some spare time. We're trying to have more volunteers at the scrutineering than Labor. They're just swamping it with people. So we need to get out there. We need to fight fire with fire. So please email media@wa.onenation.org.au. It is in the chat comments. Just let us know if you can help out. Alternatively, I'm Travis Carter. Just look us up on Facebook, and I'm helping. My wife is actually organising all the volunteers. So please reach out to us. We need all the help that we can get from you guys.
So, and there we go. So again, thank you very much for joining the stream, and we look forward to bringing you the next, when that is, in a couple of days' time, maybe, I don't know, but enjoy your evening. And as Joel said, take a break. We don't need one day a year to ask, are you okay? We can ask anybody that question at any time. Are you okay? So, and the time to do that is now. So from myself and the team behind the scenes, thank you very much.
Thanks, gentlemen. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.